testing. You know what time it is. 9 a.m. What is up? My name is Mason, and welcome to another episode of the What is Life podcast. And let's jump right into it. For this episode, I want to start off by revisiting a statement or a concept that I mentioned during the last episode. And I was speaking a lot about not being too attached to outcomes, right? To those pictures of where you see yourself being happy in the future, right? Because perhaps civilization hasn't even advanced to the place in time where that opportunity is possible. But at the same time, also consider that maybe you're the person to help us advance, right? Maybe you're the person to spark that thought to help advance us to that place, right? To push us out of the cycle that we're in and to start and to do something new. So, just because it hasn't advanced to that place, and not to add any pressure, but that doesn't mean that you have to stay there either, right? So that's a whole other element for the creatives, the creators and the innovators of the world, right? So if we're not there yet and you have this idea and this vision and the skills to get us there, then why not you? Why does it have to be someone else, right? Because we're all a part of this reality, right? We're co-creating this reality, the seeming world that we're in. So why not you? All right, so to start this episode, I want to start with a premise from the Vedanta. According to Vedanta, the greatest truth of our existence is of our divine nature. The greatest truth, says the Vedanta, is of our divine nature. And I wanted to start with that premise because today, during this episode, I want to take a look at cancel, counsel, and woke culture. And the Vedanta makes that easy because it's one of those things that takes a universal approach, right? So if the modality is something that I can see sort of a universal application, if I feel comfortable that I can achieve that, I'll use it. And the Vedanta takes that approach. So, yeah. Even if the modality doesn't, I'll still use it. I'll use it if I can. The reason I'm using the Vedanta is because it takes a universal approach, right? And for me to be looking at cancel, counsel, and woke culture during this episode, I figure I start with that, right? So, actually, before we get to the cancel, counsel, and woke culture, I want to start by introducing a new segment to the podcast, right? So, this segment is called Petition Minister Mason. And how this segment works is viewers and listeners will write in and inquire about my different perspectives or ask that I provide my insight in on whatever is situation, any particular situation, right? And being that this is a new podcast, I'm just going to be pulling from something that's happening, something current or event or something in pop culture or wherever, right? So today I I decided to pull from what's his name? I decided to pull from the passing of, and I wasn't familiar with his work, or I suppose from what I gather, he was a podcast host. He had a podcast, and he became very famous for having controversial views on different things, in particular women. So he recently passed away. I believe he was 50 or so years plus or minus, and he recently passed away. So what's been really picking up within culture is people have been giving their takes on his legacy since he passed, right? Speaking to the way that he spoke about women and ways that they consider to be negative, right? But if you've been an avid listener of my podcast, there is no good or bad, right? Well, negative within that context, they meant bad. So but anyway, they've been speaking on the legacy, and some people are campaigning for them to continue speaking on his legacy, noting that he had these controversial views, bad views against women. And some people are saying that he shouldn't speak. So there's that whole thing. And they are saying that people should give the family time to grieve too. So that is a component that I'm seeing within this argument as well. That, okay, speak or not, but give it time. Let the family grieve. I am seeing that part of it too. From what I see and what I can offer to this discussion is that it seems like it's really going back to how you see death too, in a way, right? It's going back to how you see death in a way. And also, last episode I spoke a lot about keeping this seeming reality going too. All these different versions of the thing. You see how that works too? So hey, it's adding into this story as well. So when you think about death, I remember the summer before I had my spiritual awakening experience, I had this massive shift in the way that I saw life in general. And that's in many different areas, right? But we're speaking to death here. And that was summer of 2020, right? And the death that I remember happening before that, I'll give you a public figure, was he died around March in 2019. So died in 2019. And I remember that time so vividly because around that same time, I was doing a lot of self-exploration. I was questioning my views of the world. I was going back and forth with myself about why, right? I keep speaking about always being on this path of what people consider to be good, right? Like, what good does it do to be this person when anything could happen, right? I was dealing with my own situation, and then to look out into the world and to see going through his own thing past the passing, right? His passing. After being this prolific figure in his own community, I was mourning that lot. And don't get me wrong, I was never like an avid listener of his music, but I did respect the efforts that he made within his community and that sort of thing. And even when he died, his music, it it's almost like it has a new sound to it, So, wow, I can't say enough about that. It's like even the music has transcended to a different place. But I remember that moment. It was like I was grieving the loss of myself in that moment, because it was so hard, right? Even though he wasn't related to me, he wasn't close, it was so relatable, and it hurt so bad because I was dealing with similar circumstances of being, crucified, after becoming this person that people would consider good. I was being crucified. It's like Palm Sunday, right? When you get to that crucifixion, it's like, what? Such short amount of time, this figure, and then it's just wild. So, please don't get lost in the sauce. That was in no way a comparison between myself and neither of those figures. But if you know who you are, you can see how it's relative. But in terms of the point I'm making here, I think that was the first real moment in my life where I saw things as they were, as not being good or bad. And I know that sounds wild because, like I said, I've always kind of been this person that accepted things as being as they are. But this was like outside of the cap that I was living inside of. And I know that sounds difficult, and I'll move away from this momentarily. But when he died, I grieved so hard. I was going through that same thing, right? The summer of 2020, I had this massive shift in my perspective. I can't even describe that, right? I mean, that's the best description I can give, but it just falls so short. But to give you information to build the concept for what it was, right? I had a massive shift in the way I saw life. So the next death I remember, public figure who died after I had that shift in my perspective, was and he actually died right before my spiritual awakening experience, right? Like a week and a half or two before that. And I remember it was like, whew, it was a much more peaceful experience when I got the word. I was just like, and in no way do I mean like, oh, whatever, he died. I don't mean it in that way. I just mean in sacred context, like, I know what death is, right? It just is. And it's more than just is, because there's much more of a sacred nature to it, but it's a sacred nature that's outside of that fear of understanding. And I'll move away from this. That's a concept that may take some time, but all right, so moving away from that, right? Let's look back at the Vedanta, right? So the reason I decided to start with that premise is because the Vedanta takes a pretty universal approach, and I'm always drawn toward things that I can see myself successfully completing a universal application. So right now, even, I'm at a place in my life where I can see how all religions or most religions, because I haven't studied them all, right? I can see, well, at some point in my life, I studied all religion, introduction, and that was way back when sometime, but I can see how they all seem to have the same goal, right? Just different ways of getting there, right? Different routines, different structures, toward reaching this goal. So for me, if you think about language, right? If you think about language, if you speak Spanish, I wouldn't use English to speak to you. I would use Spanish, right? Not only that, but when you speak, I wouldn't even understand it, right? So how that relates is religion is something that can meet people where they are, right? We speak about all these belief systems that people have and concepts that different cultures have, right? Values and morals and all these different things, right? So religion, think of it as a way that can meet people where they are, right? So in that case, if you speak Spanish, okay, here's your Spanish, right? Here's your English, here's your whatever, right? So you can understand within the context within you learn that you learn in, right? And not for nothing, you can always learn a new language. If we look at religion in the way I described as meeting someone where they are, all different ways to get to the same goal, whichever path you choose, right? So, getting back to cancel, counsel, and woke culture. Let's look at right? Be like a staple in the hood when I was growing up, right? Not to say isn't now, I just haven't heard him. I haven't heard much of anything lately, to be honest. He may still be, I don't know. But old school, man. I used to have this expedition, big truck, small as I am. Like I was smaller than this too. I've actually gotten bigger. But I remember this used to be like one of my go-to tracks, and my first ex would be like, you really are a big dog, as small as you are. And it was like, yeah, it was big dog energy, you know what I mean? So yeah, man. But anyway, most recently he went viral. He was going viral for going back and forth with members of the LGBTQ. I think only one or two. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But he's even been canceled for it. And it makes me want to bring awareness to sort of the way that we've been raised here in the Western world. When I think about that, it makes me have so much more compassion. Because from the interviews that I've seen, I can tell that he truly believes that his reality is the reality, the ultimate reality. And it appears that he isn't intending to cause harm, and I'm not too concerned with people's intentions. I just think it should be mentioned here, right? To build the picture of what I gather from seeing the interviews. And it just, if you're watching on video, you might notice that the setup changed a little bit, and I actually had to take a little pause because I felt the heaviness of this episode, even with the parts that I just recorded. I watched the playback and it was about 20 minutes or so, but the segments were so underdeveloped. I felt myself rushing through the recording just because I felt the heaviness, right? And I had to take a minute to pause and collect myself and then revisit this, because it's requiring a lot of my energy to get to the place that I need to get to be able to present this information, right? And I'll just say that and I'll continue, but it makes me have a lot of compassion for people as a collective. So I always mention the way culture and morals and values play a part in shaping who we are, right? And I don't think that I mentioned how politics play a role in that as well. Legislation, law. And that's important because political IQ in this world plays an important role in, I want to say cultivating, but I'll use raised. And the way we're raised as a culture, it plays a prime part in cultivating, raising the culture of a nation. So let's take a look at slavery here. And we can use the U.S. as a point of reference, right? So 13 colonies, 1600s, 1776, independence, 1800s, do away with slavery, desegregation, maybe 100 years or so after that, and 1964, 65, the exact year escapes me, but what does that have to do with this point? And allow me some time to develop this, because I don't want to speed through this stuff. So let's look at the movie Us. I believe it was directed by Jordan Peele, and it was a great movie. I don't know if it won any awards. I'm not that tapped in, but I feel like I deserved an Oscar for the way that I interpreted this movie. So spoiler alert, but if we use this movie, and if you're not familiar with the movie, I'll give you the setting. During this movie, there's these there's this family, well, there's people, and then there's these opposing people, these opposing characters wearing red, right? So we have people, we'll say humans, and we have these opposing characters dressed in red that act as their opposing force, right? Sort of the yin and the yang. So the people are the yin, and these opposing characters wearing red are the opposing forces, right? The yang. So when the main character was a little girl, she ended up swapping families with her opposing character in the red, right? Unbeknownst to her family. So she ended up swapping roles with her opposing character, and she was cultivated with her new family. And they didn't know there was a swap, but they noticed the difference. She had to go to therapy, learn to speak. Now knowing the story, she was actually learning to be human. She was being domesticated, right? Years go by, and these opposing characters in the red meet with this family. The family of the little girl, now a woman who made the swap with this character as a child. Follow me, right? Follow this stuff closely. So what had happened was this character, now being cultivated and domesticated, was, had taken on the role as a human. The opposing character had taken on the role as the yang force, right? Which were the characters who were wreaking havoc on the human characters, right? So what I saw in that movie when I saw it was the way it showcased the potential in humans to be anything. That's what I took away from it, right? You have these characters who switched as children, and one was raised to be a thing, the other was cultivated to be a thing, and they assume those roles, right? So when we look back at the issue of slavery, and mind you, this is not a segment to handle the issue of slavery. This is using this as a reference, right? We were a people who just said not too long ago that slavery was okay. And this is where the law comes back into it, right? Legislation, because now we have a law that has been ushered in, passed, that now says slavery is not okay, right? We're still those same people. Now we have this law saying that this way of life is no longer acceptable. Then you see more laws being passed to help or groom these new standards into our culture, right? You see desegregation, which probably took another 20 years for people to even be okay with that. And then, there's black codes and Jim Crow and all this stuff. But like I said, this is not a segment to handle the issue of slavery. But when we look back at what I want people to understand is that, and this is where I'm being gentle with this stuff, so please listen to understand, right? Don't listen to judge. And he may be in his own world. He believes this, right? His belief system makes up the nature of his reality, and that's his own right. My only intent with this segment is to help not only him, he's just a point of reference in this, but people to understand or gain awareness for the fact that we're all a part of a system of co-created reality that grooms us to be a certain way, right? So it almost feels like there's a debriefing that needs to take place, right? Yeah, we do all this stuff and, we keep ushering in different things, but there's a lot of time and attention to help us adapt to these lifestyles, right? Schooling systems, we're always receiving these messages that push forward the agenda at the time. But whenever we move away from those agendas, there's not a lot of attention put toward that. And that's the type of stuff that I want to highlight with this segment. But I won't beat a dead horse with that, but it's to see people and to listen to understand, because the ultimate reality is that we're more alike than we are different. And the things we do in these bodies and the lies we tell ourselves about ourselves and other people, or where we are in this seeming reality, in the grand scheme of things, is so minute. So that actually makes me think about my book, Becoming is the title. And I haven't read the book, but I did buy it. I bought it with the intent to read, That's a funny thing about books, right? You can buy them, but you actually have to read them. And I like the concept, becoming. It seems in this seeming world that we're always becoming something, right? And by the way, this is no knock to her book. I thought it was a profound premise when I initially heard it. I actually still do, and it actually, I believe it serves its purpose. Everything here, we're a big ecosystem, right? Everything works out. But thinking about that concept now, right? Becoming. Always becoming something in this reality. And I think about the way that I became this professional, right? I became the thing that I said I was going to become. And it's wild, first of all, because when you actually become the thing you said you were going to become, there's a lot of confidence that comes with it. Arrogance, even. Takes a lot of balance. And it's funny because my ego absolutely loves to talk about self, and then the God in me really enjoys to inspire, and to influence people to take those actions toward the adaptive, and we learned adaptive earlier, right? Toward those adaptive things that they feel they're drawn to. And becoming. Over time, with my newfound awareness, my new insight, I found that the beauty was actually just in being, right? It was just in being. And in that being, realizing the essence of who I am. Over time, you begin to realize that becoming anything is really just another part of the program. And Romeo, come here. We realize that it's just another part of the program, and with that perspective, when we look back at the movie in different periods throughout history, we can see how any of those situations could be interchangeable. I think the real message here is to be empathetic, because we don't know people's circumstance, right? We don't know what reality they're living in. And also to ask questions, to seek. Even the Bible, seek first, and take time to sit with yourself, understand you. You collecting all these information from all these different sources. Challenge that information. I feel like when we receive all these information and a lot of it contradicts itself, we're so conditioned and so busy that we don't even take the time to challenge the discrepancies. But if we do, who knows? Who knows what comes with it, right? But you don't know until you see. If you see, if you're even interested in seeing, right? But again, you don't have to accept any of my truths as your own. And the other thing is that we can't wake people up, as I feel like the most we can do, or one of the things that we can do, is to hope to inspire them to explore perspectives, their perspectives, different perspectives, be willing to look and to seek and take that action. But no matter how much you may want to, you can't wake them up. And it's hard too, because it's almost like you become a black sheep, not because you've been cast away or exiled, but because you've transcended so far away from the reality or belief systems or morals and values of the people that you've had access to, or the environments that you've been in. And to keep yourself in those environments would require so much energy. It's exhausting. So you become the black sheep, You become the black sheep. But for me, I knew that the lesson in that was for me to speak my truth. If people don't understand, maybe I can inspire them to have interest. And it's wild too, because I feel like I'm I'm like a wounded healer of sorts. You know, I've endured so much. I've grown through so much, but to be right here where I am, offering myself to a people that will probably call me crazy and who do ridicule. So, but this is where I feel the most happiest. So, hey. And also, I have to use my discernment too, because when you start speaking about God, people stereotype you as like a religious warrior. And it's like, listen, we're probably talking about the same God, right? And I wanted to say, and I'm going to say it, right? I wanted to say I'm probably talking about God within the context that you believe you think about God, or that context that you desire. You know, but I don't speak about God. I use my discernment, because then people also like to switch up who they are, or they have this idea of who you should be. Then they try to impose their beliefs on you. So you really have to use a certain level of discernment and you know. So this is a perfect opportunity to jump into the segment, Here's the Thing. And if you've been watching the podcast, you know that the Here's the Thing segment is a segment where I just present any kind of information. It's not fact check information. It hasn't been peer reviewed. It's just something that I've made up, or just random information I heard in the street, a barbershop, someone told me in passing. It's not fact check, right? It could be anything. Or something I just made up. But if we look at Sigmund Freud, right, which is the father of psychoanalysis, right? You know him from his subconscious framework. Probably you really know him from the id, the ego, and the superego, right? So he has these 5 stages of development, where says his theory here, his theoretical framework is that our behavior is motivated by psychosexual energy, you know, that drives us through each of these stages. And knowing how, looking at Maslow, how those needs are at that lower part of that pyramid and requires attention, when we start looking at before we received any information about the nature of this reality that we're all co-creating, all we had were the sensory experience that we're all in. Think about when you void, right? And you go to the restroom and relieve yourself. Think about the sense of relief. Even if you move your bowels, right? Think about that sensation when you actually give yourself that relief. Right? Think about that. So, when we look at Sigmund Freud's work that way, and I mean, people tried to dispute. I mean, most recently, there's been people who have looked at his work more seriously, but there was a time when they were like, listen, what is this stuff? But if we're looking at his work through the material we just explored, before we gathered any information about this seeming reality, those psychosexual energies, some of the only ones we had, right? In terms of sensory experiences here, because this is a sensory experience. So, is that a thing? I don't know. Let me know. Now I want to introduce a new segment to the podcast, and this is the first time I'm introducing this segment. We're a couple episodes in, and this segment is called In 5 Words or Less, right? I have a tendency to be long-winded at times, right? So the way this segment is designed is for me to provide insight in 5 words or less. So the topic for this segment for today is 2 paintings by Vincent Van Gogh. I tried my best with that. I think that's close, but here in the Western world, most people say Vincent Van Gogh. So you might be familiar with that. But I think it's pronounced, and forgive me if I've mistaken, but I think it's Vincent Van Gogh. So, the reason I'm presenting 2 of his pictures is because I've been talking about duality the whole episode, right? So, keeping true to that theme, these pictures, and the first picture, a lot of people seem to be familiar with. It's in black and white, so hopefully this clip does it justice. This is Starry Night by Vincent Van Gogh. And normally there's this beautiful, I don't know, I want to say stencil, but there's a type of flow he has to his brush, a type of brush stroke that he uses in this frame. It looks like a sketchy type flow. I don't have literacy in the area of art, but you can see those beautiful blues and dark grays and blacks and yellows that are depicted in this color photo, right? And it's you get you call to mind sort of a gloomy mood when you see this picture, is what the picture says to me. It's sort of gloomy. So most people are familiar with this picture, as I said. The other picture that I want to mention is, again, it's in black and white, but it's Cafe Terrace at night. And in color, it's a peaceful, in the forefront anyway, it's a peaceful setting, like a dining area outside, right? And then if you happen to look up toward the top of the picture, you'll notice a scene in the sky that sort of reminds me anyway of that Starry Night picture. So almost a very gloomy skyway up there in that skyline when you look up from this dining area, right, of the Cafe Terrace at night. So the reason that I'm presenting these 2, like I said, the theme has pretty much been duality for this episode. We'll say that. And I wanted to bring awareness with perspective also. So the way I'm going to sum this up in 5 words or less is to say, is that 5 words? Okay, yeah. So I would say, is my perspective in perspective? Right? Because when you think about it, this Cafe Terrace at night has the potential to be anything or a description of anything. It just depends on what perspective you're on, right? Let's say someone is back there off in a distance looking up, and that is their primary scene, that sky, right? So I'll just say is my perspective in perspective, and it makes me think of a time when I thought I was woke, which I was woke, but I wasn't spiritually woke, right? I became woke within that cap, which is society, right? And when I gained the perspective for the system that I was participating in, this co-created reality, I used to say, and this would be my go-to phrase, life is a beautiful thing once you see life from a perspective beyond the one that you experience it in, right? And to me, at that time, that was so profound. And it is in its own right. And before that point, I had always been aware of different types of systems, even the system. But for me to construct that phrase, that quote, it was based on a situation that I had where there was almost a zooming out from even me being aware and then seeing it from a broader perspective. And I know that's not very well summed up, but that's the best description I have of the experience, right? Before that moment, I was very much aware of all these different subsystems and how they are in relation to me, but there was something that shifted where I gained a different type of awareness. It's almost like when you have a puzzle and you're putting together a puzzle, right? You have all these pieces and you see them all and you put them together and you can see the whole thing, but when you zoom out and stand back from it and take a look, and I don't know if that makes sense, but it's the best description I can think of at this time. And but I also want to say, even in considering other perspectives, right? You can or you don't have to. Like, everything you do is your choice in life, and it's based on whatever you believe. That's your world. And it all contributes to this co-created reality, yes. But you don't have to consider. And also, with gaining this other type of insight I have about this seeming reality, it makes me curious to know what else is there for me to know, right? Like, I feel like I know the ultimate truth, the truth that's outside of this seeming reality, right? That truth, God. There's only God. And when you know that builds these other things. But even with that, you never truly know what's happening within this reality, because it can change in an instant, right? So, to sum that up, it's like, even in knowing, because you know that you can never truly know any specific conditions in this plane of form. It's wild to think about. But that wraps up that segment. I hope you've enjoyed it. That's my take in 5 words or less. Before I get out of here, though, I do want to say for my segment, Petition Minister Mason, I don't know if I've mentioned it here, but the segment is a tell-all, in truth. Petition Minister Mason. But I actually am an ordained minister, even though I probably don't look like your typical, and I cuss. But for that segment, if you have any situation or circumstance or any trending topic you're familiar with that you want to hear my insider input on, write into What Is Life on any platform, really. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Just search What Is Life. And DM me, tweet me, whatever it is that you need to do to petition Minister Mason. If you enjoyed what you heard, if you want to share it, please interact with the podcast on whatever platform. I'm a new podcast, so that will help me grow. So like, comment, share, subscribe, whatever it is that you do. And I feel like that was a good, thorough episode I have there. So it's looking like a good place to wrap up. Thank you so much for tuning in. With that, I'll bring the episode to a close. My name's Mason. And what is life? Really?